We are so honored to have Joel and Sarah. There we go, baby. Woo! Joel and Sara Mullins with us this morning. I have gotten to know them through Ori. I've gotten to know them through Facebook and the incredible kiddos that they are honored to mom and dad, to father and to mother them. Just sweet kids. And I know that Lucas is right around the corner, right? Which is really, really cool. I have spent time with them on just casual different district assembly, this, that, and the other. And I know that they have a heart for missions. I know that SNU is thrilled to have them on staff as a couple that fosters a call to missions. They're at Southern Nazarene University. I'm thrilled that you are a part of my son and his life and his call to be a missionary. He loves you both and speaks very highly of you. And actually, you know what? We've got students who are considering SNU. We've got students who are going to SFA. We may even have students who are going to Angelina College. But the truth is, there's something special about SNU. There's something special about being in Nazarene. There's something special about being a part of Lufkin First Church of the Nazarene. And these people not only love God, but they believe in who we are and what we stand for. And I think that you'll see when you speak to us that they're with you 100% and believe in what you guys do. Would it be okay this morning if we gave a wonderful, warm welcome to the Mullins family as they come? It's Mullen, not Mullins. So forgive me. Everybody say that with me. It's Mullen, not Mullins. There you go. All right, you're welcome. So glad you're with us.
I was riveted in my seat. It literally felt like I couldn't move. It seemed like the Lord had come and sat down right beside me. I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments in your life where you felt the presence of God so near, so dear, so sweet, and so precious that you felt like you could reach out and touch Him. I had one of those experiences when I was a sophomore studying at Mount Vernon Nazarene University in Ohio. And during a chapel service, God got my attention by using the theme of obedience. That word was wound through the message, through the music, through the scripture that day. And I found myself, after the sermon had been finished and all the other students went back to their classes, stuck in my seat, overwhelmed by this call to obey the Lord. And I remember speaking to the Lord out loud. There was no one else around me. I said, Lord, what is it that you want me to obey today? What is it that you're calling me to? And it seemed like he just leaned over and said, Sarah, missions. Missions. I want you to go tell my people who I am. I want you to tell people about me. And I was overwhelmed by that calling. I felt a sense of peace flood over me, and I wept in the presence of God that morning. After a time of prayer, I had already missed my next class. I just hung around and enjoyed the sweet presence of the Lord. I made my way back to the edge of the chapel, and I noticed that one other person was sitting in the very last row in the dark there. And as I neared the end, I saw it was one of my good friends, and he stood up and he said, Sarah, I have been praying for you ever since I entered in the doors of the chapel this morning. I felt like God was doing something in your heart. He said, before you tell me what just happened in your seat up there, he said, you're going to be a missionary someday, aren't you? It seemed like God needed me to hear it clearly one more time before I left that chapel, that I would know for sure he had called me. Well, up until that point, I had been studying to become a pharmacist. Now, I'd grown up in the Church of the Nazarene all my life. I'd read missionary books, I'd met missionaries and services just like this, and I'd never once heard of a missionary pharmacist before. And so I began to ask questions, of course, of my professors and people that I trusted. How can I best prepare to become a missionary, knowing that my skills seemed to be in the area of medicine? And they all seemed to give me the same piece of advice. Sarah, just change your major from pharmacy to medicine and study to become a medical missionary, become a doctor. And I thought, well, that's easy for all of you to say. I knew exactly what type of preparation was needed, the years that were required, the sacrifices that would be required to become a doctor. And I had three major concerns with this idea. The first was finances. I was already attending a Nazarene university. We all know how much that costs. And I thought, how can I attend a medical school and all the training? It just seemed impossible with my financial situation. The second question I had was fortitude. I thought, do I have what it takes? Do I have the strength? Can I make it through all of this rigorous training? And the third fear I had more to do with where I was in my life as a young Christian woman at a university, thinking about my future, as many young women do. And I thought, who is going to want to marry me, this package that's called to be a missionary, and then maybe has to study forever, and then maybe runs off to the ends of the earth? Who is going to want to join me in this endeavor? So I was thinking about, will I get married someday? And I could just imagine myself somewhere down the road, maybe 50 years down the road, and I pictured myself looking something like this.
Hey, go back to that. That's good.
I was sure that I was going to end up single for the rest of my life, and I was probably going to serve somewhere in the jungles of Africa, and that I would be alone.
There it is. All right. I was so frustrated. I was so disappointed with God. It seemed that God was silent. That's probably never happened to any of you, right? Well, it happened to me. It was actually the summer between my junior and senior years of high school. And I had been praying and praying for several years, asking God to show me what He wanted me to do with my life. I really, honestly, sincerely wanted to know. I just wanted God to tell me. And I didn't seem to have any answers. It was like God wasn't telling me anything. And I had prayed and prayed and prayed. And I was a participant at Nazarene Youth Conference that summer in Orlando, Florida, 1991. And it was a great week and a great conference and everything. But there was an expectation that I had set. And I don't know how I got to this point, but I convinced myself that during the week in Orlando, God was going to show me everything He wanted me to do for the rest of my life. Would that be great? Anybody on board with that? I was just sure that maybe God was going to give me this map that I could hang on my wall. And it would have this highlighted road on it, and it would just be the road of my life, and all I had to do was follow the map. Or today, we would say it would be like a GPS system that God would give us, God's positioning system. That sounds pretty good, right? And imagine the pre-programmed voice of God. Joel will go straight for 3 months, and then turn right, and go for 5 more years, and then turn left and serve over here. I was just sure God was going to give me that. And of course, at the end of that week in Orlando, I found myself sitting in our church van on the way back home to Rogers, Arkansas, and I had no answers from God. It was a very frustrating time for me. Well, a few months later, that fall, during my senior year in high school, something interesting happened. It was in my home church. On a Sunday morning, my pastor was preaching, and it wasn't a mission service or a mission sermon. It was just a sermon. But right in the middle of that sermon, he took this very strange little detour, and he started talking about Vietnam. He said, we really need to pray for Vietnam right now because there's a window of opportunity opening up. God is calling people to go and share the message of Christ. We need to pray that God will speak clearly to them and that they will go and be willing to obey. Then he went right back to his sermon and kept on preaching. And I just sat there thinking, that's really neat and that's a really special opportunity. I'll pray for those people. Well, about a month later, the same thing happened. The Sunday morning service, my pastor was preaching, and right in the middle, he took a little detour. He said, don't forget to pray for Vietnam. God is calling people to go to share the message of Christ. Pray that they'll have the courage to respond in obedience. Right back to his sermon and kept on preaching. Well, this time I felt a little bit ashamed of myself because I had prayed once, maybe, or twice for Vietnam and the missionaries, and then I'd forgotten all about it. Well, this time I really committed myself, and I said, I'm committing to pray for those people that God is calling to go. Well, a few days later, something very, very different happened. This time I was alone. I was in my bedroom at home, and it was a Tuesday afternoon after school, right before Thanksgiving, and I was reading from the New Testament. I was actually studying for an upcoming Bible quizzing tournament, and I was reading from Ephesians 6. You know that there's some really good things in Ephesians 6, right? Things like, children, obey your parents. Things like, put on the full armor of God. But something really struck me that day when I got to verse 10.
I thought, if I'm going to be a missionary someday, I sure need to know what missionary life looks like. And so I signed up at the very next chance I could with the university to go on a summer missions opportunity. And I went to the country of El Salvador. And while I was there, I met some missionaries, and being so eager and having been freshly called of God to become a missionary, I asked them lots of questions. And they were so gracious to answer them. One of the things I asked them was, how did you know that God was calling you? And they said we were in a very different spot in our lives. We were adults with children, and the way that God called us, we had to be sure that it was His voice that we heard. And they said this quote became very clear to us, and it was this: understanding can wait, but obedience cannot. And they reminded me that in their life it was true that many things about becoming a missionary or going on a mission experience did not make sense. It didn't make sense to leave all that they knew behind to go where God had called them. But they knew the voice of God had called, and they needed to obey. And I remember writing those words down in the front of my journal, in the front of my Bible, and reflecting on that. Understanding can wait, but obedience cannot. And it was almost as if the Lord was saying, Sarah, fasten your seatbelt, because this ride that I'm taking you on might look nothing like you're expecting. Well, I went back to school after that experience and felt for sure that God had confirmed that call in my life. And I began preparing to become a medical missionary. And one of the steps in that process was taking the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test. This was that exam that would help answer that question: am I really smart enough? Do I have what it takes to make it into medical school? I had to pass this exam to gain entrance. Well, I took that exam, and I was very nervous about it, and I thought, I've got one more summer before I find out the results. Let's go ahead and sign up for another missions experience. And this time I went with the Youth and Mission Program, which back in the day was a program that the Church of the Nazarene ran, where they placed university students from different Nazarene universities all around the United States, placed them on different teams together, mixed up. And I happened to be on a team with several people from different universities, and we went to the country of Papua New Guinea that summer. It was a wonderful experience, an eye-opening experience culturally and spiritually, and also for me to confirm that call in my life. And I remember the day that the scores arrived in my home in Michigan. I had given very specific instructions to my parents about how they could fax them to the missionaries in Papua New Guinea. There are some in this crowd that may not even have a clue what a fax machine is. But back in the day, that was the only way that we could communicate. And I remember the noise that the fax machine would make, and you'd be so excited that you were getting some news. Well, I remember the missionary came running across the yard with this piece of paper in their hand, that thin fax paper, and they said, Sarah, I think this is the results to that exam that you've taken. Your parents have communicated with us. And I took one look at it, and I folded the paper in half, and I ran into my room where I was staying because I didn't want everyone to see my reaction to those scores. I opened up the paper, and I looked at my scores.
Do you know what Ephesians 6:10 says? It's a life-changing verse. It says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. And I don't know what it was about that verse on that day. I can't explain that part of it. But I know without any doubt that as I read that, I sensed God's mighty power surrounding me. I knew that God was near. He was speaking right to my heart. There is nothing like knowing that God is near, that He's speaking right to you. And as I listened and cried and prayed in God's presence that day, I knew that God was saying, Joel, I want you to serve me as a missionary. Now, I know what some people are going to say. You're going to say, how in the world could you possibly know exactly what God was saying to you? Well, I don't know how to answer that question very well. There was not a thundering voice from heaven, or there was no writing on the wall or anything like that. It was just the still, sweet presence of God and a very clear affirmation. This is what I'm asking of you. And I said, yes, Lord, there's nothing I would rather do than whatever this means for my life. That day was the beginning of a real adventure for me of seeking to understand what does it mean to serve the Lord in obedience as a missionary. After graduating from high school, I decided to attend Southern Nazarene University. And my time was a very important time for me of growing and learning in preparation for life and ministry. During my third year there, my junior year, I found out about an opportunity to serve in the following summer through the Youth and Mission Program. And I decided to apply, and they interviewed me, and then I didn't even know if I would be accepted. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I got a letter one day, and it said, congratulations, you've been accepted to the Youth and Mission Program. And you've been assigned to go to the country of, has everyone figured out this story yet? Papua New Guinea. Sarah and I were placed on the same youth and mission team that summer. We had never met. We were from different states, attended different schools. But together with our teammates, we had the privilege of serving the children of Papua New Guinea. That really is our first photo together. That looks like Sarah. I know that doesn't look like me. That summer was a confirmation for me, very, very clearly from God. This is the kind of life that I've called you to. Well, there was something else about that summer, because Sarah and I realized fairly quickly that God had brought us together for a reason. We were going the same direction in life. We had the same call to ministry and a call to missions and a desire to serve God. And we just knew that we were meant for each other. and that we thought we would get married someday. But we didn't know how that would work or when or how. We both had 1 year left in school. And so there was this little thing at the end of the summer when we came back to the United States, we realized we were going to have to say goodbye. And we weren't even really sure when we might see each other again.
I was so disappointed that day when I opened up the facts and I looked at my scores. I knew what type of scores I needed to get into the schools that I applied to. The scores that I saw weren't quite up to that mark. And I remember sinking to my knees at my bedside, overwhelmed with disappointment, thinking, Lord, have I disappointed you? If you called me to this and I can't quite do well enough, how am I going to fulfill the call that you placed on my life? And I began to question and I began to doubt. And those words of those missionaries that I met one summer before rang true in my ears. Understanding can wait, obedience cannot. And I remember the Lord almost reaching out his hand to me and saying, Sarah, just hold tight. You don't understand what I'm doing, but hold tight to me. Obey my voice. I am with you always. I went back after that summer confused. I thought for sure that there's no way I can make it into medical school. But much to my surprise, in the stack of mail that my mom and dad had kept for me while I was away, I kept looking through the envelopes. There were 3 or 4 invitations to medical schools to start the interview process. And I thought, did they see the same set of scores that I saw? It was a miracle, I thought, that this door seemed to be opening up. But instead of feeling joy at the idea of going to medical school after all these dreams and plans, I began to feel dread and doubt and confusion. And I remember asking people, my pastor, my family, to pray for me because I felt this overwhelming confusion in my heart about this. I even asked some guy in Oklahoma if he would pray for me, that I would know what God was trying to say. I had 2 weeks to make a choice about these schools, saying yes or no to the interviews. And as I got near to the end of the 2 weeks, I was desperate for a clear word from God. And you know how you do sometimes, you open scripture and you hope that that word will just jump out at you. I told God one evening, I'll start in Matthew and I'll read the whole New Testament this evening. I need to hear from you. I need to hear your voice. Well, I didn't have to read far. I got to John. I got to John chapter 15, verse 16, and it says this: You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And while I know that verse says nothing about medical school, and it surely doesn't have my name in it, it may as well have been that clear to me that night. I knew God was asking me to close the door to medical school, even though it didn't make any sense. And he was asking me to obey and step in a new direction. He was still placing that call on my life to be a missionary, but it was going to come about in a different way than I expected. I remember waking in the morning with a peace that overwhelmed me from head to toe. I felt completely at peace in my heart that I could say no to these interviews. I had to make difficult phone calls to people and my professors and let them know that I was changing my plan. And every single one of them, without doubt, said, Sarah, you know that coming back to this point in your life and starting here and being able to go to medical school won't be as easy ever again. I had to tell them with confidence, God has called me in a different direction. Well, it wasn't as if God said, Sarah, medical school is not but behind door number 2. I have this fantastic opportunity. I didn't know what was lying ahead of me. I felt like I was walking into a forest of unknown. And you may recall that I had those concerns about being smart enough or having the finances to fulfill God's call in my life. All of a sudden, those weren't relevant anymore. But that third idea in my mind of, am I going to go this road alone? Am I going to be single for the rest of my life? That was still in the back of my mind somewhere.
I got back to campus for my senior year at SMU, and the first week I ran into someone on campus. It was one of the pastors from the area, and he was talking to me about the summer, and he found out that I'd met a girl on my youth and mission team who was from Michigan and attended Mount Vernon Nazarene University. He said, that's interesting. He said, because I've already been invited to speak at a chapel service later this fall at Mount Vernon. He said, since I'm going all the way there, why don't you come with me and you can see her again? Well, that sounded like an outlandish idea to me. But by the next morning, I totally changed my mind, and I thought, this is a good idea. And I called him up, I said, I think I'll come with you. And he said, well, since you're going all the way to Ohio, and since she was so special and everything, he said, you're going to propose to her, right? I thought that was a pretty crazy idea at the moment. But by the next morning, I totally changed my mind about that as well. And I said, you know, this is going in a good direction. By the end of the week, I had a plane ticket, I had a ring in my hand, and I had a plan. Sarah didn't know I was coming to Ohio, so this was a surprise to her. But the morning of the chapel service, I got there about 3 hours early because I didn't want Sarah to see me anywhere on campus that day, and I hid away in a little tiny closet back behind the stage for 3 hours. It was a long morning. Then the chapel service started, and the singing and prayer, and the pastor's sermon that day was on relationships, Christian relationships, and the importance of serving God together as partners in life and in ministry. And to illustrate one of his points, I became a sermon illustration, right? Coming out with a microphone in my hand and a ring in the other hand to ask Sarah to marry me. Now, that was a very important moment. Not just for me and Sarah. Now, it was special for us, of course, but it was a very critical moment for the pastor. Just think for a moment, what if she had said no? How would he have finished his sermon that day? I have never figured that out. But anyway, she did say yes. That day was the next step for the two of us on this adventure of serving God together as partners in life and in ministry. Well, now we had a big question to answer. If you haven't noticed all the way along, our question to God was always, Lord, what are you asking us to do next? It was not, what do we want to do? What are our plans for the future? But what are you asking us to do? And so we began to plan a summer wedding, but we didn't know what was going to happen after that. Where are we going to live? How are we going to serve? What is God asking of us? Well, we found out about an opportunity to serve as volunteers through the Church of the Nazarene in Italy. And after our wedding, the possibility was to go there for a couple of years and serve in the local church there. And at first we thought, that doesn't seem possible. We'll be newly married. We don't have any money. We don't speak Italian. We knew like the words pizza and pasta and chop. And that was it. And we didn't really know how it was going to work out, but we sensed God saying, this is what I'm asking you to do. So after our wedding that summer, we found ourselves on a plane, headed to Catania, Sicily, the country of Italy. And we worked as associate pastors there for 2 years, working with the youth and the music in the church, learning to love Italy and the Italian people and language and the Italian food. You can't go wrong with Italian food. You really can't. But that was, it seemed to us that our dreams were being realized, that we knew we were exactly where God had asked us to go. Well, now we fast forward the story quite a lot, because there's not time to tell all the rest of the story. But we have served in Europe for 14 years as missionaries, and during that time we worked in several different countries. But we want to tell you a story today about a family who encountered God, and it turned their life upside down.
During our ministry in Italy and Eastern Europe, we've seen evidence of God working over and over again, where He's at work long before we ever arrive on the scene. In this story we want to share with you an example of that. In the primarily Muslim context of Albania or Kosovo, young people there would often tell us stories about how they had never heard about Jesus, but they would have dreams about someone calling them by name, someone dressed in white in a bright and shining robe. And they later on would put that together with the faith that they were encountering and realize that Jesus had known them by name. He was calling them by name, even in their dreams. In post-communist nations like Romania and Bulgaria, people would tell us of meeting a Christian after the wall fell down in 1989, how there was an influx of evangelical Christians that came in to help and to aid and to bring the message of Christ, and how that meeting of a Christian, that first meeting, left an indelible mark on their life that called them to seek God in a way that they had never sought God before. In Italy, of course, the place that we've lived the longest, people would often tell us stories about how they were disillusioned or disappointed by organized religion, but they still felt that need to know the God as creator, to know who it was that had created them, and they could not escape that yearning for Him. In each one of these cases, we realize that God is a God who longs to be found by us. He does not hide Himself from us. He doesn't make it hard for us to find us. He's not distant. Instead, He longs for us to reach out to Him. In Jeremiah chapter 29, He says this, "You will seek me, and you will find me, when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord." And this is a beautiful reminder that God is calling us to Him. He's not one of the gods of the other religions we know in the world today that keeps Himself hidden. He reaches out to us, and He's often at work in the lives of people's hearts that we encounter every day at the grocery store, at the supermarket, in the schools. We can realize that God is working in their hearts